Okay. I have a wonderful job this morning. I get to introduce my amazing friend, Amanda Knief. When I first met her, she was working in the Iowa State Legislature, writing education laws. And when the legislature was not in session, she would go out and volunteer with the Red Cross to go help with disaster relief. And at the time, there was a lot of flooding, and she was there helping people put their lives back together. From there, she went on to the Secular Coalition for America to be an amazing atheist lobbyist. She represented our movement in the halls of government in a way that really had not been done before until she did it for Secular Coalition for America. She's now managing director for American Atheists, and she's still an awesome friend. But her experience, because she has always been there in civic life, this is why she is the citizen lobbyist. She didn't just write this book, she lives this book. So you got to go get a copy after this. I was lucky I got mine signed. See? She's going to be signing them out there. So it is my great pleasure now to turn over the podium to the citizen lobbyist, Amanda Knief.
Thank you, Jenny, for that wonderful introduction. Jenny and her husband, Phil, who's in the audience, gave me a home when I didn't have one when I moved out to D.C., and introduced me to all kinds of culinary delights and reinforced the fact that I hate mushrooms. But they're great friends, and if you are lucky enough to know them, you understand why. I am here to talk to you today about the Faith-Based Initiative. And just real quick, show of hands, who knows what I'm talking about? Excellent. And how many already hate it? Okay, for the rest of you, by the end of the day, you're going to join us. So I titled this presentation, The Golden Calf, Why the Faith-Based Initiative Needs to be Sacrificed. And if you think there's some religious overtones to this, you're right. So a little bit of biblical history. How many of you are familiar with the Old Testament? For shame. No. So according to Hebrew and Christian Bibles, Aaron, the brother of Moses, created a golden calf while Moses was away listening to God on Mount Sinai. And when Moses returned, he was enraged because they created this calf. And it was with good intentions. They were trying to worship Yahweh. But Moses said that it was doubly bad. Not only did it was an idol. They had the Ten Commandments. That was, the real thing. But it also attributed physicality to God. And God was not a calf, dude. That was bad. So, what does this matter? We would like to take you to the land of make-believe. And actually, this is a sign in New Jersey, I discovered. And that's where I live now. So, it does exist. I'd like you to pretend that the Faith-Based Initiative is the golden calf. And that religious institutions and organizations are the Israelites. I am Moses. I bring the word of God in the form of the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights. And for those of you who are chafing against this, it's the land of make-believe. Just go with it. And together we are going to destroy, as Moses did, the faith-based initiative, that money-sucking, self-congratulating program that poses as legitimate public policy. How does that sound? All right. So, some background. Where we stand today. According to the Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, which is what the Obama calls the Faith-Based Initiative, a church, a mosque, a synagogue may apply directly for faith-based funds from the state or federal government without a separate charitable purpose. So if you have a church, a synagogue, whatever, and I'm going to use church mostly because that's where most of the money goes, you can get faith-based funds, money from the government, for any reason and not have a separate charitable purpose. And that means that you say, I'm going to have a soup kitchen, but there's no check on that. You can just say you're going to do a soup kitchen, and you can apply for the money and get the money, and yay. I wish I could do that. I'd be happy to run a soup kitchen out of my apartment. These organizations do not have to publicly report how they spend the money because they're not required to file Form 990s. The AHA is a 501c3. It is required to file a Form 990 so that you know how we spend donation, all the money that we get. And we don't get a lot of government money because we're not a religious organization. But we tell you how we spend the money. Churches don't have to do that. These faith-based organizations can discriminate in who they hire and why they fire employees based on religion. And this has included decisions based on gender and homosexuality. Anyone give the Salvation Army? Don't admit it if you do. We all hate you. The Salvation Army discriminates blatantly based on religion and homosexuality or on your life stance. They actually sent out I believe it's in court records, that they sent out a survey after the faith-based partnerships and offices during the Bush years was established, asking their employees to tell them, what's your religious stance, and how do you feel about homosexuality? And they fired a bunch of people based on their answers. And these employees challenged it in court, and they lost. Because under the faith-based initiative, they're allowed to do it. Billions of dollars are being doled out, not only by the federal government, but the federal government is then sending this money to the states, and every state has a faith-based office. How many of you know about your state's faith-based office? Yes, you all have one. And they're being sent out specifically to send the money to these faith-based organizations. So, it didn't always used to be this way, and I'm going to take you back a little bit to the Civil Rights Act, where it used to be unlawful for an employer to discriminate, to fail or refuse to hire or discharge any individual because of an individual's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. There is an exemption in Title VII for church groups and faith-based organizations that allow them to discriminate in hiring practices in order to maintain their organization's integrity. So this is how, for example, the Catholic Church gets away with not hiring women priests. Fair enough? I mean, not fair, but I mean, that's kind of how it happens. And this is traditionally referred to actions of the organization using their own money. So if you are an organization and it's all your own money and you're doing your own thing, you could discriminate. If you only want Catholics to work at your Catholic school, but you're not accepting any government money, we're not going to mess with you. But once you accept government money, then it becomes a different issue, right? Right. Okay, so I got two presidents up here, and real quick, I just want you to know that I am the 10th cousin removed of FDR. I have no idea if I'm related to LBJ. I'm looking into that now. But anyway, FDR used executive orders. For the first time, any president has used executive orders to ban anti-discrimination at the federal level by contractors. And this was during World War II. What had happened is a bunch of men went off to war. And contractors were not necessarily being very open about who they were hiring. And some of those factories and those jobs were empty. And we were in wartime. We needed those jobs filled. So he signed an executive order saying that race, religion, color, and national origin, you couldn't discriminate. If you were going to take money from the government and fill these contracts, you couldn't discriminate. And LBJ expanded those prohibitions to all contracts, not just ones for building weapons and whatever was needed in wartime. And then came the 1990s and charitable choice. And how many of you remember John Ashcroft? Yeah, we love John Ashcroft. No, we don't. In 1996, President Clinton and Congress passed the Welfare Reform Act, and John Ashcroft introduced something called the charitable choice. And it altered existing law to permit social service funding of houses of worship. So what it meant was, in the past, if Catholic services or Lutheran charities or any of these religious-based organizations wanted to provide social services, whether it was foster care or homeless services or anything related that was not was not proselytizing, they had to form a separate 501c3. So AHA is a 501c3. That meant Catholic charities had to be a 501c3. That meant Lutheran services had to be a 501c3. Anything that was going to do social services, even if you were religiously related, had to be a separate 501c3 that had to do a Form 990 because you were receiving government funding. That way you fell under the same laws and the same strictures that a secular nonprofit that was providing social services fell under. Everyone got to play by the same rules. Everyone had to follow the same laws. But charitable choice changed that. And it took away that requirement for some social services so that churches and other religious organizations that wanted to provide some of these social services no longer had to do that 501c3. Became fungible. So it was considered, well, they're already good, they're good organizations. Why do they need to do this? You know, they're already in place, they're already organized, it's a burden on them. Let's let them do good works, you know. They don't need to be held to that standard. There's lots of sarcasm in my voice, if you couldn't tell. So, when Bush came along, he expanded this to the faith-based initiative. And he created the organizational guidelines. He used his executive orders in an unprecedented way. Mandated the first 9 departments that created it, and he created the Center for Faith-Based and Community Initiatives. And when I say faith-based and community initiatives, basically I'm saying all faith-based organizations. There was very little community in it. And it made it much easier for churches and faith-based groups to receive federal money, and it let them circumvent anti-discrimination laws for the first time since FDR. So for the first time, if you were applying to a Catholic organization, and I'm picking on Catholics and I apologize, it's not just them, or the Salvation Army, or any other religious organization, they could now specifically not hire you because they can ask you, are you Catholic? And if you said no, sorry, you could be perfectly qualified. You could be the best qualified person, and they don't have to hire you because you're an atheist, or because you're Jewish, or because you're Wiccan, or because you refuse to answer the question. And if you already work for the organization, and they find out that you're homosexual, or you're lesbian, or you're gay, or whatever, they can now fire you, and it's perfectly legal. So where we are now. In 2008, President Obama said at Zanesville, Ohio, during the campaign, that he would stop this, that federal funding should not be used to discriminate, and that he would put a stop to it. He didn't. When he announced his new White House faith-based neighborhood partnerships, there were no reversals of those policies. And we had a hard time getting any discussion about this from the White House. Josh Dubois, who at the time ran it, said that discrimination issues, if someone came forward and said they had them, they would be decided on a case-by-case basis. And I should note that during the second term now, Josh Dubois has left his post, and Melissa Rogers is now running the office. So we at the Secular Coalition, and also many other religious organizations, the Secular Coalition works with the Anti-Defamation League, with Americans United, with AHA. There's a whole group called CARD, Coalition Against Religious Discrimination. Sent letters, asked questions, got no response. So I was invited to a town hall meeting in 2011 in Maryland at the university to hear President Obama unveil some economic news, and it was a big town hall meeting. And they let me choose where I wanted to sit. So the president was going to come out like this, and there were lots of seats out in the front, and there were a row over here. And so I chose a seat over here, and I chose the very end seat on the row, the bottom, and I ended up sitting with a bunch of Democratic fundraisers. And I learned this because we recognized the faces. And I knew there'd be a question and answer session, so I was sitting there and I was writing my question, and I waited, and he gave this great speech about economic, reform and helping jobs. And then he said, okay, now I'm going to do question and answer, and I'm going to go girl, boy, girl. And he looked over, and I already had my hand in the air, and I was standing up, and he goes, how about you? And I said, yes. So I stood up, and I said that I was from Iowa, because he likes people from Iowa, because we won him his first caucus. And I said I was a fan. I was very nervous. And then I asked him my question. And I asked him why, in a time of economic hardship, was he allowing organizations to discriminate based on religious preference when people were struggling who were qualified to get jobs. And he spent 3.5 minutes stumbling through an answer. One of the smartest presidents we've ever had, a constitutional lawyer, could not answer me. And I stood there going, and they wanted me to sit down, and I wouldn't. They took the microphone away. And he came back, and at the end he said, and not everyone thinks we're doing a great job. Apparently you're one of them. And I was like, yeah. That was one of the first times, it was the first time we got him on the record as president about the issue. And they've been very slow to respond. And we're very hopeful that Melissa Rogers, who was on a council to work on this issue, will help. But she's bound by what the administration is willing to do. So, fingers crossed, no. We will work on it. But right now, just so you know, there are now 14 departments at the federal level, all getting money specifically to dole out on behalf of the faith-based initiative. So where are we now? The Bush administration spent more than $1 billion through the faith-based initiative. Now, it's very hard to track this because there's no mechanism in place. There's no government accounting. There's no organization that's been able to track the money. Politico found that at least $140 million in the stimulus money specifically went to faith-based groups because the White House targeted them. And this was not for homeless programs, foster care, soup kitchens. This was to replace boilers, put on new roofs, put in better windows. They specifically targeted churches and other religious groups to get the money. And if the states weren't willing to do it, or they weren't pushing the money fast enough, the federal officials went over their heads and contacted groups directly so they could get the money. President Obama is still pushing this. He mentioned it in his address in 2012 to accept the nomination at the convention. And so you have to wonder, why are they doing this, right? Why is it so hard to get rid of this golden calf? The FBI, the Faith-Based Initiative, creates a government-funded method to entice votes for whomever is in the White House. It's a completely separate funding stream from election campaigns, and in such a way it's almost impossible to track, critique, or prove that they're connected. Executive money is harder to track. There's supposed to be, when a grant goes out, you're supposed to be able to track it. How many of you are familiar with government tracking of grants and the programs? It's notoriously flawed, am I right? Yeah, it's very difficult to track it. And if you go to any department, whether it's Department of Energy, Health and Human Resources, and look at their funding programs, trying to find out which ones are faith-based and which ones aren't is a nightmare. So I think it's a conspiracy, literally. There's no tracking of the faith-based initiative. CARD, Americans United, ACLU, Secular Coalition have all written letters, have demanded to know from all these departments where the money's gone. What percentage goes to faith-based initiative, what percentage goes to secular? No response. They've gotten nothing, no answers. They've had meetings. Information isn't available. We don't keep track of it that way. All kinds of non-answers. So it's not like people aren't trying. It's just no one's getting the money. Nobody's getting it. There's no way to know, once the money goes to a faith-based organization, how they're spending it. Since they don't have to file Form 990s, there's no way to know where the money goes. And they can proselytize. So once the money goes, and let's say they are running a soup kitchen, it's perfectly fine for them to preach while they're eating, or to require them to listen to the preaching while they eat. And if you don't want to, go find a different soup kitchen. And there's no way to track any complaints of discrimination in the hiring and firing of employees. We've asked for that as well and not been able to get any information. It did used to be better. For decades, religious organizations provided social services with the use of government funds without the faith-based initiative. It allows the proselytizing. But here's the thing. Any program that could be federally funded under the faith-based initiative could have been funded before the faith-based initiative if it had agreed not to discriminate and not to proselytize. No religious group has ever come before Congress and said that it needs to proselytize or discriminate in order to provide social services. They may want to, but they don't have to. So, there was a case called the Hine case that came out in 2007 by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that there is no taxpayer standing to challenge how the executive branch spends its money in this particular case. So we can't even go to court and challenge it. Because I'm certain, how many of you were thinking lawsuit? Yeah, we tried that. And they said that there's nothing in the Constitution that specifically says that we can challenge how the executive spends the money. So this allows presidents and governors to funnel millions of dollars to churches and religious organizations whose leaders have access to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of congregants. That's a lot of influence, isn't it? So even if you have the far right who hates Obama, this is a hypothetical, you have a whole lot more who don't, and whose churches are getting possibly thousands of dollars to do the work that they want to do, or whose boiler is fixed, and whose congregants didn't have to chip into the offering plate a little extra more in order to do it, or who have a new roof. So, and it can be traced directly back to the executive branch, not Congress, and it's your dollars. And you get no say in it, because there's nothing in the Constitution that says that you do. There's no reporting for it. There was a state case in Georgia. A Catholic organization was doing drug rehabilitation. It's the only program in the county that did it, and they needed a counselor. And so they put out the query, and they had an applicant, went through the process. He was eminently qualified. Weren't a whole lot of people applying for this job. It was a fairly rural county. You get to the end of the interview process. He's screened. He's all good. Are you Catholic? No, I'm Jewish. Sorry, thanks for applying. He sued. Now in Georgia, when it came up to the case, he won. But that's not happening at the federal level. We don't know about it. And if you're running a homeless shelter, if you're running a soup kitchen, if you're doing foster care, or any of the myriad services that religious organizations are perfectly good at doing, I'm not saying they're not, why is it that we aren't just as good at taking care of them, doing it? Why should they be allowed to discriminate with federal dollars, your dollars? So how do we stop it? We need to point out that the discrimination is wider than what we're just showing. The Salvation Army is a perfect example of this. If more people talked about it, if we could shame the supermarkets and the stores that let them put out the red kettles at Christmas and explain why, that would be a really great way to do it. Because what they do is awful. The way they discriminate, the way they hand out their goodwill, and how they choose it is shameful. They are a church, and that's how they're registered. So they don't have to tell you how they spend their money. They just take your money, and then they discriminate in how they do it, and they discriminate in who they hire. Faith-based organizations tend to be racially homogenous. And so it's more likely that when they hire and fire people, they're going to do it based on who is most like them. But when they serve people in the community, it's not the same. It tends not to be the same people who need help as the same people who go to your church. Does that make sense? So it helps everyone if the people you hire to help in your community are more representative of your community, not necessarily of the same people who sit in the pew next to you. We need to talk about that. It does not help churches or other houses of worship to take money from the government. It undermines them. And I think we need to start talking about that we need to have more say in their policies. If they're going to take our money, we need to start saying that we have a say in how they run things. Call their bluff. We don't do that enough. we don't call their bluff enough. We need to get angry. We need to get upset. We need to lobby. We need to get in the faces of our local politicians and say, they're taking our property tax dollars by hogging up all the land. They're doing all these social services, and they're saying that they get to do it under religious freedom. Then I want my money back. And if they want to do it their way, then don't give them any more money. And start being vocal about it. We can be mean too. Demand parity between religious organizations and secular groups. The Red Cross has to do a Form 990, and it costs a lot of money for them. They spend a lot of money to pay accountants and tax preparers to show you exactly how the money is done. The AHA has worked very hard to get Charity Navigator and the Better Business Bureau to certify that we do things in a proper way. Why shouldn't any church that's doing social services have to do the same thing? If you're a church and it's your own congregants and they don't care how their money is being spent, that's one thing. But once it's our money that's going to that church, we deserve to know how it's being spent and whether it's being spent properly, because who really wants to trust anybody these days? Don't we all deserve to know how they're spending the money and whether it's being spent properly? But we're not demanding it. We're not hearing from people. Your elected officials are not hearing from you. The IRS is not hearing from you. And now is a really good time to start demanding things from the IRS. That's all I have, but I will happily take questions. Thank you for your attention. Please get angry about this. Please get upset about this. Contact your local office. You all have one, and they do pay attention. And if nothing else, start directing funds to secular groups rather than faith-based ones, and push the accountability and the transparency that secular groups have. Foundation Beyond Belief is a good one. So, thank you. Okay, I've been asked that you go to the microphones because we're live streaming and recording so people can hear, but the question was, where's a good place to find secular political groups? Okay, are you asking for, like, to get involved in... Okay, how do you figure out what is secular and what is not? The AHA is a great resource for that. They list a lot of organizations on their website. You can also go to the Secular Coalition for America. It lists lots of organizations that are friendly to our cause. It is okay, I think, to donate to religious organizations that recognize the difference. There are groups that do and are on our side. So I'll give you a few, and as far as finding resources, also if you go to FFRF, if you go to American Atheists, if you go to, let me think of another one, Foundation Beyond Belief is a great charity to go to. These are all places where you can also find links to other groups and other organizations, and they will help you find not only organizations like us that advocate, but also charities. Okay.
Thank you for your remarkable talk, very much needed. The Boy Scouts of America, I don't know if they get any federal funding, and I don't know if they're classified as a faith-based organization because they have a belief in God as part of their pledge and part of their requirements to be a Boy Scout, but in my opinion they are. And now that the gay issue, they're in the process of trying to put it behind them. What is there any room in what you're talking about for us to include the Boy Scouts as a faith-based organization that's discriminating against people like us? And if so, strategy would you encourage those of us who really think the Boy Scouts are sort of dangerous to us as they are now established?
Good question. Technically, the Boy Scouts of America would not qualify as a faith-based initiative organization. They'd probably be considered a community one. And I don't know if they get money through this program. That's a really good question. It's really hard to know who gets money under this program. Some groups are more open about it than others. The idea that they're allowing gay scouts but not gay leaders is awful. What they're saying is that that once you grow up, you're awful. I don't understand it, and I think it's a hollow victory. And the fact that they still require that you have some sort of God belief, any kind of God belief, or that you may make you lie in order for your child as a non-theist, a humanist, and atheist to be included. We have been on the side of the LGBT community on this. I think it's time we start demanding they be on our side. It is absolutely time to ramp up the criticism and to not celebrate the fact that they're allowing gay scouts without the fact that their parents would not be allowed. Den mothers and fathers are not being allowed because they're lesbian or gay. What kind of message does that send to your child? I think it's awful. So I am not supportive of their decision, and I will not accept Boy Scouts in any form until they accept atheists as well. If the point is to turn out good, moral adults, I think they're failing miserably because all they're teaching is discrimination and hate.
In 1996, I was working for a mobile HIV testing program, and we went to Salvation Army shelter. It was a shelter, it was specifically a drug rehabilitation shelter, and actually taxpayer money was being used because people would go from the jail to the shelter before being released. And when we were doing HIV test counseling, we discovered that the Salvation Army was doing HIV prevention education that was absolutely false. They were essentially lying. They were saying condoms don't work. They were telling them that AIDS was airborne. The messages they were given were just plain lies. And so I'm wondering if there's a way to approach this question by addressing the ways in which the services that are provided are not just religious in nature, but are also lies in terms of the health information they're giving. And I'm sure that this is not the only case. This is just, we happen to see this because we happen to be there, but it made me really think, what are they teaching these men along the way while they're supposedly providing a service?
By the way, this is Rebecca Hensler, who leads Grief Beyond Belief. Everyone, please give her a hand. She's doing fantastic work in addressing the needs of our community with death and end-of-life issues, and she's going to be speaking, and you should all make sure you attend. It's another great question. This is where, when you see things on the local level, writing or getting in touch with local elected officials is really important, and contacting your state office is really important, because on a federal level, you're not going to get the attention. But if you can notify media about this, if you can get the literature that they're passing out, and you can bring attention to it. This is where bloggers are fantastic today, because they reach so many people, where Twitter comes in handy. All this stuff has a downside, but this is the positive side, because you can get the message out so much faster. It's much harder to hide the misinformation that people are sending out when information can be spread out so quickly. Almost everyone has a smartphone these days, and if you don't, I highly recommend you get one, because you can videotape stuff. So when someone is standing up and talking to people and they're saying this kind of bullshit, sorry, we're live streaming, saying this kind of crap, you can record it and get it out very quickly, and it's harder to deny. If we could show what the Salvation Army and some of these other organizations, it's much easier, and once you can bring it to their attention, it's much harder for the people who are in elected office. It's much harder for a governor to stand up and say, oh, yes, we support them. So bringing attention to it, paying attention to it is really important, and getting involved. If we just sit back and let them take the money, the longer we do it, the harder it is to reverse course. And yet, by the same measure, if you're volunteering for an organization that's doing good work and they're not getting government funding, start demanding why. Why aren't they getting help? Why are they being denied? And give me 1 second. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, does anybody here know who they are? Evil personified? That's a hypothetical observation, personal opinion. They were given a government contract to provide medical services and treatment to human trafficking victims. And the Health and Human Services grant for that covered everything, including services for rape and abortion, counseling, anything that they needed, because these were victims of sexual torture, okay? The Conference of Catholic Bishops did not provide that particular prong of the contract because it was against their religious beliefs. So women and children who needed these services, who were victims, innocent, and were miraculously, because so many of them were in this program, were saved, were rescued, then did not get the full list of services that they were supposed to, because the grant was given to a religious organization that didn't think that based on its beliefs, these people, these women and children, deserved it, should get it. And when this came to light and it was exposed, Health and Human Services hadn't done anything about it. It wasn't until it was publicly opened up that people started saying, what the heck? And they took it away, and they gave it to another organization that would give them all the services. And then the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops threw a hissy fit. And they had congressional hearings about the discrimination against the Conference of Catholic Bishops by Health and Human Services. So this is what we're up against, folks. This is the kind of thing that's happening. We have to pay attention. If we can discriminate against human trafficking victims and then call it discrimination when they're not getting the full services they want because the organization that we said help them said, yes, but only 90% of it because the 10% that you think they should get we don't agree with, is okay, there's something wrong with us. I'm going to go to this side.
Thank you. My name's Linda Brown. I'm with the Secular Coalition for Arizona, where we have a very energetic and energized membership, particularly in the past week. What I'm curious about is, in our movement, have we ever organized efforts to form churches and apply for these funds and compete? And for instance, has there ever been a pro-civil rights bucket standing next to a red bucket and offering people a choice? Have we tried tactics like that? Is it, and if we have they, what's the history of it? And if we haven't, why not?
That sounds like an awesome fundraiser. By the way, real quick, and I'll answer your question. If you haven't heard, the Secular Coalition for Arizona, including Sarah Blaine, who is their executive director, found a wonderful state representative who claimed to be an atheist and nobody had noticed, and he gave a secular invocation at the opening of their house just a couple weeks ago. So congratulations to them. And
he's coming tonight. Representative Juan Mendez is driving over as we speak.
Fantastic. What's even more interesting is he gave this secular invocation, including quoting Carl Sagan. And then the next
Sarah
day...
wrote the invocation, by the way, and she was originally slated to deliver it, but through a technical snafu, she didn't, so Juan did it himself.
Which not not anything at Sarah, who I adore. I'm kind of glad he did it.
It is kind of good that he did it.
The next day, one of the other, Steve Smith, I believe, another representative, said that they needed to do a do-over to make up for the fact that there wasn't an actual prayer the day before, and so he asked the representatives to join him for a makeup, a repentance. Prayer, and about half of them did. So American Atheist has demanded an apology, and we're still waiting. But, okay, so the question was, have we ever tried to organize churches to do this? I think England has the first atheist church, and they got kicked out of the actual church, and now they're in an auditorium. And I don't think they're actually organized as a church, they just call themselves that for it. In the United States, anybody can be a church. You could just call yourself a church, pretty much. The IRS actually has a list of criteria in order to make that determination. How strict they are, we don't know. There seems to be some funky business about whether you're a conservative group or a liberal group now, and whether you get 501c4 status. I don't know what it is with 501c3 status. I do know that there is a law group that fights in court, and they decided that what they were doing was righteous, so they call themselves a church now. I'm not sure how that works. But anybody can be a church, pretty much. Whether you get 501c3 status or not, I don't know.
I think you probably could, given I've formed a couple myself. I bet you could, but
the question is, you know, is that the way to go for us, or do we want to fight against the churches? And I would guess that for most people, being that disingenuous is not the way we want to do it.
It's not necessarily being disingenuous, though. You can be very, very out. And I'm just thinking of strategies to shed light on the discrimination.
Well, both American Atheists and FFRF have filed lawsuits against the IRS for their failure to impose the tax code as it is written, and for their discrimination in how they treat religious organizations versus secular ones, and the inherent fairness. So I think that's one way to do it, using the courts. And I think the idea of putting a bucket next to the Salvation Army and doing a compare-contrast type thing is not a bad idea.
Okay,
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. I'm with the Secular Coalition for South Carolina.
Woohoo!
And yeah, it's cool. We go back to back there. So I'm still very new to lobbying, and I was wondering what you thought would be the most effective way to fight faith-based initiatives at the state level, especially in South Carolina. So like, do you have any advice to what we can try to do?
I have this book called The Citizen Lobbyist.
I know, I'm really good.
For $10, and it will give you all these strategies, but specifically and seriously, it depends on your state. First of all, you need to find out your faith-based office and find out as much as you can and ask questions. It's much easier to get information on the state level than it is the federal level, and find out what they're doing. Find out who they're giving money to. Go and visit. Go ask for a meeting and say, we'd like to know what you're doing. We'd like to know where the money's going. We'd like to see your reports. You can file FOIAs, state FOIAs, Freedom of Information Acts, and they're much easier to get on the state level than federal. And, you know, it depends how much attention you want to bring to your group and to your attention you want to pay to this particular issue. I say go for it. You know, and then once you know where the money's going, or if you can't get it, start getting the media involved. Start posting that you can't get this information. Bring attention to the fact that no one will talk to you. You know, start bringing attention to that. And once you get media involved, once you get people paying attention to the fact that no one's being forthcoming, you'll get attention.
Cool. So are they generally receptive, do you think, at a state level if you ask these questions?
Receptive?
Yes.
No.
No? Okay.
No. But they're also not used to being asked, because not enough of us are asking the questions. Not enough of us are. It takes time. It takes effort, and a lot of us just don't have that basic roadmap of how to do it. It seems really big and insurmountable, doesn't it? But you can break it down and make it much easier on yourself, and just ask a few pointed questions, do a couple of meetings, and you can often get really great results. And because state officials are not nearly as practiced at the art of hiding things or of playing, you know, hide the cup, they'll let things slip. And, figuring out and then, realizing what you've got, put it all out there and let someone else realize, oh my gosh, they let all this money go there. And, you can find out stuff fairly quickly because they're not used to being asked. They may not like it, but they also probably won't know what they shouldn't share or wouldn't want to share. So go for it. You never know until you ask. And they're not used to being asked.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Amanda, you mentioned that the legal ruling finding that taxpayers have no standing to challenge government expenditures on faith-based initiatives. Was that a Supreme Court ruling?
Yes.
Did the justices specify who would have standing to challenge such things?
Yeah, it's a very complicated case, and I was very general. And so if you are interested in the details, it's the Hein case, H-E-I-N. It was in 2007. It was brought by FFRF. And they were challenging the faith-based initiative, and they were specifically challenging the money that was being sent to these faith-based organizations. And the Supreme Court ruled that you can challenge congressional spending based on what's in the Constitution, but that the way the federal government is built, that you cannot challenge how the executive branch divides and spends the money, that there's no taxpayer standing for that.
No taxpayer standing, but does anybody have standing to challenge them?
The vice president? I honestly don't know. I'm not trying to be, well, I guess I was being a little flippant, and I apologize. I honestly am not sure. If you're not a taxpayer, the only other, maybe if you can find discrimination, but the problem is getting enough information to know. Can you show bias? Well, it's called the Office of Faith-Based Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, but it doesn't say equal. So if you're the Red Cross doesn't take any money from the government. It's completely separate. They don't want any money from the government, so they can do whatever they want. So what organization is going to challenge all the money going to churches and not getting any? I don't know.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That microphone is lonely.
Maybe because I'm naive or something, but I was really shocked by your statement regarding the Salvation Army. I've been contributing to the Salvation Army fairly heartily because they spend most of their money on their programs compared to many other organizations. Their CEO gets a minimum salary. So I would be interested in knowing, I believe you mentioned that you would give us names of groups to which we could contribute, knowing that they were not discriminating in their parceling out of funds.
Who you give money to is very personal. And I use the Salvation Army as an example because there were court cases where this information was brought out and the Salvation Army was allowed to do it. They had a court case in their favor, and it showed that the discrimination allowed by the executive orders has been proven in court. I know of many people who give to the Salvation Army despite the discrimination. So if you want to give to them because of certain reasons, I joked, that is up to you, and I would never tell you not to on a basic human level. There are many organizations out there that do good works locally. There are many charities, secular and religious, that do a lot for their community, that do not discriminate on any level. And that's the timer. The Red Cross, I am partial to the Red Cross. It's had its own history of issues. There was a time when it discriminated against LGBT. There's a time when it discriminated against Black Americans back in the World War I. But when I worked with it, it didn't matter that I was an atheist. I was very open about it. When I went on disaster relief and helped people, when the money came in, there was no question about everyone got money. Everyone got help. It didn't matter who you were. Socioeconomic issues aside, everyone got help. In our movement, the Foundation Beyond Belief is doing great work at identifying charities, and you can pick who you want to give to. They have a religious component. So if they find a religious charity that's doing good work, you can choose if you want some of your money to go there or not. And they are also doing great work when disasters happen. They set up a fund specifically for that, so you can give money just to that disaster fund and not any of their other sections. There are many other organizations, local, federal, national, that you can give to. You just have to do a little research. And other than those two, AHA has humanist charities, and they're doing good work. It's more limited. AHA doesn't have quite as much staff, so it tends to be a little more limited, but we do have our own charitable branch. Richard Dawkins Foundation has a charitable branch. And I think most of our movement, when a disaster strikes, has really worked very hard to give people a way to give so that atheists can do it as a group, to show that there is an atheist space to giving. Because we've all been giving. We just haven't been giving as a collective, so people didn't see it. And churches have that advantage. And so we've been trying to give ourselves the same advantage. I hope that helps. I'm going to go to that side.
Hi. This was a really great presentation, and one piece that I had never thought of before was this connection to electoral politics and the advantages it gives the currently seated person in the White House. And so I'm wondering whether one way to battle this would be to ally with people that are interested in campaign finance reform issues. And I mean, I imagine there's a very large lobbying conglomerate there that could put their weight behind this. Had there been anyone pursuing that particular angle?
Me.
Oh.
This is my thought process. This is something that I woke up one night having nightmares about. This was why I think the faith-based initiative is never going to go away, because it is a backdoor to campaigning and electoring, the electoral advantage. It's brilliant, and no one else seems to think about it this way. But to me, it is, putting aside the 10% of religious right churches that hate Obama, it's brilliant if your church is getting money. So when you talk about election reform or campaign finance reform, you can't touch the executive branch. It has nothing to do with that, because that's federal money that's being spent by the federal government. It has nothing to do with election and campaign reform. So how you get the two, I don't know. I don't know how you touch it. And I have a full-time job, and I love my boss, and he's pretty fond of me, but he's not going to give me 6 months off to go do a dissertation on how to fix it. So if anybody else has 6 months and wants to sit down and talk about this, I'd be happy to give you all my research materials, and we could figure it out together. But I honestly think that you're never going to see this go away, not without a lot of grit and fighting, and I think we have a better chance at the state level of fighting it and getting at least equity and parity for secular organizations, at least non-religious ones, because it's such a brilliant way to curry favor with churches. I mean, it's brilliant. And until we have the same huge secular network of charities and free thought halls, and we're never going to be able to compete.
Thank you.
Yeah, I spent the last 10 or so years of my life. I lived in Atlanta for 2 years, Charleston, South Carolina for 3. I'm a tornado bird in Oklahoma and Arizona. So these are my frames of reference. I call it the Republican Christian Party. At least it is in those 4 states. If you come from a state where it's different, I'd like to hear from you. However, you just got into the area that I wanted to deal with. That the Republicans moved in to attach that faith-based initiative first. And they got through George W. Bush. And now you have the Democrats realizing that the pollsters prioritize what people vote on. You know, like your first issue is abortion, and nothing else matters. Your gun is you, matters more than anything else. And many people, their church is one of the main reasons why they pick candidates. So if the Democrats saw how successful the faith-based initiative was being used by the Republicans, now they're in catch-up. And now they've got the tiger by the tail, and they don't want to let go, because if they let go, they know that all of us are going to end up, for the most part, supporting liberal candidates, and we're not going to switch off just because of this issue. We're not going to say, oh, we're not going to vote for whomever because they're taking faith-based money. So we're in a sort of a bind now. And I know, you just referred to it, but, I think we should all know that, and I don't know what to suggest other than public financing of elections. Thank you.
Okay, so how many of you have ever contributed to an election? Okay, you guys suck. You just blew my point out. Okay, but here's the thing, and take this home with you, please. Less than 0.01% of the public contributes to political campaigns. So especially on the local level, I'm not talking federal right now, local level, school boards, city council, state representatives, state senate, that kind of thing. If you contribute to a campaign, the maximum level, which in Iowa it's like $250, you're like gold. You're like the creme de la creme of donors, okay? It makes you important to that campaign. And if you can get a couple friends to do it with you, now you have to pay attention to your local campaign finance laws, okay? You have to pay attention to those because they're different in every state. But they're pretty easy, and you can actually usually call a campaign and say, I'd like to do a fundraiser with some of my friends, have them over, make them pay $20 for a hot dog, and then I'm gonna bring you the money. They will bend over backward to make sure you do it right. If you can do that, have 20 friends over, make them pay $20 for a hot dog and some really bad potato salad, and then take it to the campaign, you are suddenly a big fish in a little pond. And this is a big deal because then you have a direct line in political public policy in your area because you're a donor. And that's all it takes. And maybe that's a little pessimistic or a little, what's the word? Cynical. But it's true. And the squeaky wheel gets attention. I learned this at the Iowa legislature by working with 150 legislators. If you send email, if you show up, if you show passion, if you are a voter, the number one thing that you can do to change politics is vote in every single election. How many of you skip a few? How many of you have voted in every school board election ever? Liars. If you vote in every election, because the fact that you vote is public record in most states, not who you vote for, nobody knows who you vote for, but the fact that you vote is public record. If you can show that you are a consistent voter, that you care about the issues, that you are participating, and then you go and you tell these people, these elected officials, not only am I a voter, not only have I voted, but I'm gonna keep voting, and you better pay attention because I have influence, because I have 20 people who will pay $20 for a hot dog and some crappy potato salad. They will pay attention to what you care about. And you can do that to more than one elected official. Because if some of your friends don't have the same elected official in city council, let's say they have the one in the district over, then you've got 2 city council people listening to you and what you care about. Make sense? So this is one of the ways to start making politics matter, to start influencing. It doesn't take a lot of money, but it takes effort and coordination and getting some people together to eat crappy potato salad.
So, looking at the faith-based initiative as a backdoor way of sort of buying votes, do you foresee a chink in the armor being finding a church that hates Obama or whoever the sitting president is that actively got denied a grant when they can show, hey, we do actually do some social benefit, but look, we're denied. You're using this as discrimination of one church against another, where our neighboring church, who is for the incumbent president, did get their grant, and they have less to show for it.
Okay, so possibly, but even the churches that hate Obama get money. So there's so much money going out. I mean, $1 billion in the Bush administration. I mean, even if you get $5,000 to help run your soup kitchen, or you got a new boiler, it's hard to claim discrimination, because the other thing is how many churches are there? How many of you have ever gone through your phone book and counted the churches? There's more churches than doctors, which is sad in a lot of places. So it's hard, it'd be a hard case for someone to say that there's discrimination, because there's so many churches, the sample would be blown out, because you can't give grants to everybody. And again, you'd have a hard time being able to prove it because the data is not there. Nobody's been able to get it. So if you could prove that Church A hates Obama, applied for a grant, didn't get it, but Church B applied for a grant and got it, and that was a consistent pattern, you might have a case. But chances are you aren't. And other than the churches that hate Obama, there's not a whole lot of people standing at the pulpit bringing attention to the fact that they're praising Obama, right? It's the ones that we hear that are challenging the IRS law that says you can't proselytize from the pulpit. The ones that are challenging it are the ones that hate Obama and are against some of the social issues. It's not the ones who are praising Obama or who are for social change, correct?
No, we gave them two.
I'm being, in the grand scheme of things, I'm not necessarily an Obama supporter. I'm just talking about what we have right now in the frame of reference. It's certainly become much more vociferous from the pulpit since Obama became into office. How many of you heard about the Cheerios commercial? Okay, so Cheerios does these heart-healthy commercials where some kid will ask, what does Cheerios mean? And then they'll wake up the parent, and make them eat Cheerios because it helps their heart and dad or mom will live longer. You guys know what I'm talking about? So there's a new one, and it's a little girl who comes in, and she asks her mom what the box means, and mom explains that it means your heart will be better. And then you see dad waking up, and he's laying on a couch, and his entire heart is covered in Cheerios. And the commercial has been inundated with hate because the mom is white, the dad is black, and the little girl is biracial. And Cheerios refuses to pull it. So I'm just saying that, there's a lot of hate in the world, and I hate to end on that point, so somebody ask something. Anyway, the point that the faith-based initiative is very insidious. It's very low, under the bridge, kind of riding through, because it's not getting a lot of attention. The Obama administration has been very good at keeping it under the radar. It's up to us and other groups that don't want it to succeed, do not want it to keep doing what it's doing, to raise attention to it. You can do it locally. You can support the national organizations that are fighting it on a federal level. And I encourage you to do that, to learn more about it. Just keep fighting it, because it's your money and it's being spent to discriminate, to fund churches. And if they need a new roof, they need to pass the collection plate twice, not use our money for it. Thank you so much.